now, Erik.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction and thanks for inviting me to speak here. Yeah, I'm going to talk about eID. I'm going to talk about BankID in the Nordics. Living in the Nordics, we take this for granted. I do a lot of presentations international. I realize this is a fairly new concept for most people to understand how this really works. Even though you live in the Nordics, well, you might learn something as well on how this model is. And of course, we're going to end up with looking at the protocols, and then I'm going to hand over to a colleague of mine who's going to go into more details on how we really got where we are. So first of all, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And if you're as old as I am, well, you're going to remember this cartoon that came out more than 25 years ago. And this is still the challenge. This is still the problem we're trying to solve, figure out who are we dealing with. So that's the core problem. Of course, this could be funny, as Dave Birch said in 2018, or it could be really scary when not knowing who you're dealing with is affecting elections, which we're seeing is happening around the world now. So knowing who you're dealing with online is actually very important. We are all used to our physical identity cards. We all have one passport. Regarding where I travel, I'm using the same passport. That's accepted by all countries in the world as a travel document. And it's important to notice a passport is actually not an identity document, it's a travel document. But in lack of other documents, it's also used for identification since it has a picture and has important information about the individual. Then with driver license, well, I can use my same driver license driving in different countries. The simple way to explain an eID is that this is the digital counterpart of that. So it's a digital way of proving who I am. Unfortunately, there is no global system for this yet. So each country has their own. I've shown some examples here. I'm coming back to some of them. So we're using this to prove who I am, but only within a given context. Before I go into more detail, I'd just like to say a couple of words about Signicat. Some of you may know us already. I've been with Signicat for more than 5 years now. I work as the VP of Identity and Innovation, which means I do a lot of presentations presenting these topics and other topics. And I'll be doing a similar presentation to this at Identiverse conference, which was supposed to be in Denver in July, but is now, of course, also online. So that's going to be a similar story. And of course, to the Americans, this is in general a very unusual concept, the eIDs. Signicat's vision is to accelerate trusted digital business. We work with large corporations, primarily banks, financial institutions that have very high requirements on knowing who people are. They need to comply to the anti-money laundering directive, which means they really need to know who the person are, each person is, and then of course monitor what they're doing as well. But identification is what we offer. We are a European leader in identity. We have 250 employees, or it's probably higher now. We're hiring all the time. We have the highest coverage of eIDs, which means through one interface, you can access a number of them. I'll be coming back to that. We have our roots in the leading identity regions, meaning the Nordics, which is the most mature region in the world, and also the Benelux, which is really coming along in the use of eIDs. And we provide a full digital identity journey. I'll give a couple of words on that. We're also a qualified trust service provider. That means, according to eIDs, there's really strict requirements on doing an audit for processes, for handling incidents, etc., to be qualified as a qualified trust service provider. So we have gone through this. We offer a timestamp authority as our service as of right now, but we have more on the roadmap. I mentioned the digital customer journey. I look at this at 4 different areas. One is the first time interaction with a new user. This is getting to know a user for the very first time. They connect to your website, they want to sign up. How do you know who they are? And we use a different means of doing that. So I'll at the end, I'll go back to a little bit on that. Next is validating. So even though I know who you are, can I trust you to fulfill your obligations? So we need to check things like your credit score. Are you a politically exposed person? We can check your address. Do you work for a specific company, etc.? So that's the validate part. Serve part is recognizing a returning user. So when know is getting to know you for the first time, serve is recognizing it's the same user coming back. And this is where we need a two-factor authentication to know it's the same user. And finally, we offer services for commit. So that's electronic signatures and seals and timestamping. This is where a user or a business signs a contract or a consent to something. And this, as I briefly mentioned, is not only for people, it's also for organizations. I may want to onboard my organization as a customer to a bank. That makes it even more complex because then I need to know not only who I am, but also am I authorized to act on behalf of that organization. So this is the life cycle. Let's have a look at the Nordics. What's the situation? In general, we talk about the Nordic region like this. The four major countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, approximately 26 million people. And the eID coverage is about 90% of the population, which means pretty much everybody has an eID. There are a number of different eIDs. In general, they're often referred to as BankID. However, BankID is one of the schemes in Norway. It's also one of the schemes in Sweden called BankID. Although these are completely separate, they have nothing to do with each other. It's different technology, different organization, etc. And then there are some others. We have NemID, which is going to become MitID in Denmark. We have Finnish Trust Network that you heard about earlier this morning. So there's a number of different, and the average use is 4 times per week, which means each individual in this region on average use their eID 4 times per week. So people in general are very familiar with using their eID for various different purposes. So what are you using the eID for? What's the aspects? How do you use it? So basically it's 4 things. It's the identification, it's the know part, it's the first time interaction. So if I want to become customer of a new bank in Norway, I will use my BankID to that bank, and they will know enough about me to onboard me as their customer. So identification is one. Authentication is the second one, so I can use it for login, and I do that frequently as well. I can use it to sign, so I can sign the document, a contract, I can sign a money transfer, sign off to different kind of things. And I can use it for attribute verification. Not used a lot yet, the attribute verification, but I'm going to give you one example. So that's an example where I only need to prove something about myself without revealing a lot of other information. Some use cases, and this is specific from Norway. This is my home country, so this is what I know most details about, and this is what I'm using. Obviously, I use it for my bank. If I'm going to log into my bank, if I'm going to open an account in a new bank, etc., I would use that. I use it for my insurance company whenever I want to go in and check my documents or add an insurance, report the damage or something. I identify myself with BankID. Government, when I do my taxes, I log into the government and file my taxes. Again, I identify using BankID. I can log into the health portal, so I can look at my records, my prescription, vaccines, etc. Again, I identify showing this is me by using BankID. I can do a virtual doctor's visit, which of course has become more popular in these days where meeting physically has been challenging. So you then use an app, you identify using BankID, and you know the doctor knows who they're talking with. If you're a student, apply to higher education, or you have accept a position at higher education, again, you use BankID. A lot of different purposes. When I sold my car, I used BankID to sign off that I sold it. The buyer used BankID to verify that I bought it, and the transfer was done. No more paperwork. That was everything we had to do. A couple of amusing ones. The tanning salons, which have been around for some time. A few years back, a new law was passed in Norway that you have to provide proof that you're over 18 to use a tanning salon. And since most of the tanning salons are unmanned, that's a challenge. Again, the solution was BankID. So you would use the tanning salon app. You would use BankID to identify yourself. And the only information that's revealed to the tanning salon is you're over 18. So they don't get all my details. They're not going to find out really when I'm tanning, etc. So they get that information. So that's one example of attribute verification. Another amusing one is naming your baby. So in most cases, there are two parents. They need to agree on a name. Traditionally, you would fill in a paper form. Somebody would take that paper form and walk down to the registration office. Again, now this is used by signing off a document with BankID. Of course, in the first example, when you walk off, the one parent could actually change the name on the way down there. Now, with both of the parents needing to sign off with BankID, well, that's going to be much more difficult. There's a lot of examples, and more are coming in this. So it's interesting to see you can reuse the same for a lot of different purposes. Just some examples from Denmark. Pretty much same examples, and I can do the same for Sweden and Finland as well. So having a reusable national identifier, it's of course good for me as a consumer because I have one eID. I don't need to remember all these different credentials. I use the same credentials for a lot of different purposes, as I showed you. So it's a convenience factor for me. It's a convenience factor for the service providers because they only need to integrate access to the eID provider or providers, or they can go through Signicat, as I'm going to show you in a few seconds, if there are multiple. And again, for society, it's a well-known, reliable eID. So we know that you're not a dog. Of course, some potential downsides, and there's some challenges. This works very well because we're high trust societies up in the Nordics. But of course, it's based on a monopoly and closed business models. BankID in Norway is run by the banks and is in such control by the banks. Currently, there is no cross-border. There is work on eIDs to solve this. That's one of the things eIDs is about, to harmonizing the eIDs across different countries. But currently, my Norwegian BankID works only in Norway, with some exception. There's some work in the Nordics going on to do some interoperability. You could, of course, be concerned about privacy, tracking of usage. Again, we're a high trust society. In general, that's not really where people are worried about, but that would be one thing because BankID, of course, would know every time I use my BankID. And there's no targeted eID, meaning everybody gets the same information. Everybody gets everything about me. Well, more or less. One thing is the national identification number, which is the unique identifier for each individual, can only be given to authorized service providers. So not everybody will get that. And my example of the tanning saloons, well, they only get the Boolean value saying you're over 18. Comparing the Nordics to some other countries, we see the penetration, the blue bars, that's very high in the Nordics and fairly low in some countries. Germany is interesting because they have a national eID called NPA, which is based on chip cards. The total number of cards is very high. The activated is about half of that, and usage, people that actually know they have it. If you ask a German, well, do you have the NPA and can you use it digitally? A lot of Germans will say, well, but I didn't know that. And the usage is very low. As you see, the Nordics is high and the other countries is fairly low. Belgium is really increasing now with the scheme It's Me. So I said Nordics is really in the lead here, but we see Benelux is coming, and also Germany. A lot of interesting things are happening in Germany on this as well. Just to give you an idea, I've talked a lot about now how I use it for all kind of different purposes, just to show you the user experience on this. So this is showing my health portal. If I want to log into my health portal, helsenorge.no, I hit login. I can choose which eID provider do I want to use. So I have several to choose from here. So I would choose BankID Mobile, which is the one I use, but I can choose another one as well. To log on with that, I would provide my mobile number and my date of birth. So those two parameters are used in the BankID Mobile to initiate that. The BankID Mobile in Norway is based on the SIM card, so it's an app in the SIM card. So this works on any good or stupid phone as well as on smartphones. And I've done a binding. Initially, I've done a binding between my specific SIM card and my account. So what happens when I enter this information, the phone number and date of birth, I will first get a challenge. And that's the fun part of this, because this is a random generated word. It's not a number, it's 2 words. And sometimes it's a lot of fun. The one I got when I created this demo was mystisk svor, which means mythical crackling. And sometimes you get really funny combinations. They change them for Easter and Christmas and so on. So you get a lot of different things. So what happens then? This app pops up on my cell phone. And again, you can see the same challenge. Mystisk svor is shown here as well. And it also shows who is requesting this. In this case, ID-porten, which is responsible for Helse Norge. And they're going to use it for identification and not for signing, for example. So, okay. So if I get this pop-up and I haven't done anything, I would just do cancel, right? But okay, now I requested it. I get this pop-up. I enter the PIN code. And that's it. That's the user experience for getting in. And now I'm in the health portal. I can select, do I want to see my own or my wife's health information? That's a very quick demo of how this works. Just some examples. I did a presentation in Germany and compared Germany to Sweden in this usage of these eIDs. So in Germany, each bank will have a different way of logging in, different code generators, etc., and so on. In Sweden, you would use BankID, and that's it. Insurance, same thing. You have multiple insurance company. You will have credentials for each of them. Most of them may not even have a second factor for login. Again, Sweden, you would use BankID, or Norway, or Finland, or Denmark as well. Telcos, same thing. You can see it goes on and on, where you see in Germany, for government, for example, you would have different logins for different parts of the government even. In the Nordics, you would use the same for everything. So as you can see, for the user point of view, this is very convenient. It makes it very simple, very secure, easy to implement. I mentioned I'd get back to the platform. And as I mentioned, we had these 4 parts at the top there: the know, validate, serve, and commit. At the bottom, we have the hub, which is interesting. We connect to different eID validators. We connect to different eID providers and different attribute providers. So let's stick to the middle one, the eID providers. I've shown some of them on the map earlier. We have the Norwegian BankID, the Swedish BankID, Finnish Trust Network. We have NemID in Denmark, etc. A number of different. We have connection to 30 of them. If we have an international customers, and most of our customers operate in more than one country, they can interface to Signicat, and we then provide this connection to all these different eID providers. So through one API, you can reach all a large number of different eID providers. And that in itself is a challenge. Similar with the eID validators, this is where you can do identity paper scanning. You can do video interviews, so we have providers doing that. The attribute providers would be like the citizen registers. In Norway, it would be Brønnøysund. It could be company registers like Bisnode or Virk in Denmark, etc. So connecting to all these different kind of providers through one API, and that's the value we provide in this. So coming to my last slide here, this is a picture showing on the top 3 different customers using different connection protocols they have implemented over different times. We offer OIDC, SAML1, and SAML2. Of course, SAML1 is really on the way out now. We still have a lot of customers using SAML2. And of course, OIDC is what new customers are signing up with. Then we have a long list of eID providers, and they use different kind of protocols. Some of them are proprietary protocols because they're old, they've been around for a long time. We still have some providers using SAML1, SAML2, and OIDC. So this picture shows we're hiding all the complexity of that for our customers. They don't need to worry about that. They just connect using whatever protocol they have to SingleCAT, and we do all this magic behind the scenes. And more details on that is what Dag is coming back to in the next presentation. So I'll leave it for that. And I don't know if you do have any questions or comments to this. Nope. Either somebody is on mute or there were no comments or feedback.
Also, I would just like to remind everyone that if you have any questions or any topics regarding Nordics talk, it's possible to propose sessions for Thursday and Friday. So that's also an option. So you have a question here, Erik.
Yep, okay, let me see. That was in the chat box, right? Okay. If a future government is a problem, what happens? Okay, I'm not sure what you mean by the question, but of course the challenge is this is monopolized and it wouldn't work in all countries. So there's a lot of work going on in decentralized identity. And I think that's definitely going the way forward. There's a lot of obstacles in that road as well to make that happen. It sounds very easy when you get started and we can put trust in the blockchain and, you know, blah, blah, blah. That's simple, and it's not. It turns out there's a lot of challenges to make that happen. But one thing you will gain is the independence from a centralized authority. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, Craig. All right. Okay, anybody else?
Okay, I guess we can move on to Dag. Thank you very much for your talk, your presentation, Erik.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me.